Kansas looks to follow up from the Houston win by showing something they haven't done so well, winning on the road against a rival in Kansas State. We recap the game on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can hear me as well Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. on at KLWN in Lawrence with Rock Chalk Sports Talk. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. We are previewing Kansas State. We'll get to top storylines, Kansas State scouting report, matchups of the game, and Hawks to Soar player matchup as well on today's edition of the show. First, we are brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Kansas takes on Kansas State. Big Monday game in Manhattan. 8 o'clock tip-off for that one. And obviously, that's one of the first storylines. You have a rivalry game here, right? Anytime that's the case in college sports where, as much as you are trying to win national titles and make Final Fours and make bowl games and whatever sport, make, NCAA tournament, whatever it is, the basis of college sports and I honestly just sports you're watching in general is going into the rivalry games. Like that's the base of stuff, right? Trying to beat your rival and trying to come out on top. So that obviously becomes a big storyline in this game. And obviously that gets a little bit more, excitement after last year, I guess, in one term of saying Jerome Tang comes over and has a great first year at Kansas State and they beat Kansas in Manhattan. And then Kansas gets him back and beats him up in Lawrence. So this year, obviously, you'll be playing him twice again. And you'll play him twice over these final, 9 games now. But you lost, obviously, your last year in Manhattan. And there have been other times where you've lost before in Manhattan. Still, you have by far a winning record there. But those years certainly, stick in your craw a little bit. And anytime that happens, kind of in your rival. So now you're trying to win one back on the road in Manhattan. And I think it'd be interesting because this K-State team is not as good as last year's K-State team, but they still have a couple guys who maybe can go off. And from a Kansas perspective, you also have struggled on the road to this point in time. So playing on the road here for Kansas when they've already lost, all their games on the road to this point, and even some where they clearly are the better team. Like Kansas is definitely a better team than West Virginia is. They're a better team than UCF is. And they lose both those games, right? The Iowa State game, like Iowa State just played very well, but still. Even the Indiana game, you won on the road. Like that was kind of much closer than it needed to be in some standpoint when you look at how Indiana has certainly fallen off since then. And I thought Indiana played a pretty good game, but still, you get the point. So that becomes even more apparent when you have struggled on the road. Now for Kansas, this game is more about the Big 12 title race. This game is, now that everybody has 3 losses or more in the Big 12, it becomes about trying to continue to set the tone and stick around at the top of the conference by continuing to win games. And I think furthermore, it's trying to show that you can be a more consistent team by winning on the road, because you haven't been a great road team to this point, because part of winning the league isn't just beating the other top opponents, right? Like think about some of the years that Kansas might have lost to a really good opponent that year in the Big 12, whether it was losing to Baylor or Texas Tech or one of these other teams that maybe ended up having a really good season. But they ended up winning the league because Kansas didn't just get big wins, they got the consistent wins, right? It's the combination when you win the league. You can't just beat your Houstons on Saturday and try to beat your Baylors this next Saturday. You got to come through with some of the other wins so that it's a consistent thing as well. That's how you win a league titles. And this is kind of in that wheelhouse of trying to do that. Meanwhile, for Kansas State, this game is a little bit different. It's about clinging to any bit of hope of making the NCAA tournament. It's because for them, you lose 4 straight games. And right now you look around like bracketology, they're not kind of in those positions. And for them, it's gaining back some pride after losing 4 straight games. It's making themselves feel like, hey, we can get this thing righted. But if you're talking about a team who is basically on the bubble, what would go better than beating Kansas to your resume and getting a quad one win and what that could possibly do for your team? So very different spectrums, but obviously high level motivation for the team that you're going on the road against, even though they've lost 4 straight. Kansas State comes in at 14-8 overall. They're 4-5 in Big 12 play. Currently, they're ranked 75th on KenPom, which is 12th among the 14 teams in the Big 12. In the non-conference portion of the schedule, they had some solid top 50 wins over Providence and Villanova. Then they had losses to top 100 teams in USC, Miami, and Nebraska. So far in league play, it's been a couple different tales of their first half of games to their second half of games. Among their first 9, they went 4-1 to open things up. And it wasn't just 4-1. It wasn't, I guess, maybe the hardest schedule in the world, but they were like beating the brakes off some of these teams. They beat UCF by 25 points. They won at West Virginia, a place Kansas lost in, by 14 points. Their one loss was a 1-point loss at Texas Tech, who's been one of the better teams in the Big 12 so far. Then an overtime win against Baylor and a home win over Oklahoma State, which obviously hasn't been great. But, to that point, it's 4-1. Yeah, win over Baylor, like close loss to Tech. It's like, okay, they might be a pretty good team. Team who, last year in the non-con, there were questions like, I think they lost to, I forget if it was like Butler or Cal or somebody like that. And then they had the hot start in Big 12 play, and it was like, okay, this team's for real. And you started to wonder if that was the case this year too. But since that 4-1 start, they've lost by 11 points to Iowa State, 22 points at Houston, 20 points to Oklahoma, and recently, probably the worst of them all. I mean, this was the closest loss, but given the opponent at Oklahoma State, that's an Oklahoma State team that was without Bryce Thompson, one of their 2 or 3 best players on the team, and you lose to them on the road. So it's a 4-game skid for them. And during that 4-game losing streak on Bart Torvik, their offense is ranked 217th in the country. So that is just completely dipped off for them during this streak. Now, what they do well, they shoot really well from 2-point range. They're 3rd in Big 12 only games in 2-point percentage on the season. Offensive rebounding has been a big-time strength for them. That's something that Baylor typically does, and so Scott Drew coming from there, like they did it well last year too. They're top 35 in the country in offensive rebound rate, more in Big 12 only games, middle of the pack though, so that'll be interesting into this game. But overall in the season, they've been very good. This is a very good defensive team in Kansas State, even though the offense has maybe let them down a little bit. They are top 30 in the nation on adjusted defensive efficiency on KenPom. They've been top 3 in Big 12 only games. They've done it with a top 3 2-point defense, a top 3 3-point defense in conference only games, both of which rank top 60 in the entire country when you add in the non-con games and just everything they've done with the full body of work. And after what Kansas did to Houston, it is now Kansas State with the number 1 effective field goal percentage defense in league-only play. Now, what they don't do well, shooting from 3-point range in terms of efficiency. They're barely inside the top 300 nationally for 3-point efficiency. What is a little bit scary here is they take a huge volume of threes, one of the higher rates in the Big 12, which means that, yes, on average, they're a bad 3-point shooting team, and they take a lot of them, which is not a good thing. But in a 1-game sample size, when you're juiced up with a home crowd in a game that matters a lot to you, if you take a lot of threes, do you get hot? Because then the numbers are going to keep going up. And that is the worry in this game. And we've seen, obviously, some games where that has happened, specifically on the road, like West Virginia and Iowa State. They've also not been great at possessing the basketball offensively. They way too many turnovers. They're 14th in Big 12 only games and 347th in the country in turnover rate on offense. Overall, they're just in general bottom 3 offense in the Big 12 and non-top 150 overall offense. I mentioned they're in the 200s over this 4-game losing streak. And though the defense is really stellar, they have been really bad at defensive rebounding, ranking in the 290s of the country, and they haven't really been forcing steals or turnovers. So they're not like dominating the possession game defensively. They're just getting teams to miss shots. For the personnel, it is Tyler Perry, who is the North Texas transfer at the point guard spot. He was awesome at his last stop in North Texas, shot really high volume, considering they played like the slowest tempo in the country, super high efficiency. Hasn't totally translated over. Some of the totals have been good, 14.6 points, 4.8 assists, but he's been a chucker this year, low volume shooting. He's only shooting 40% on twos. He's only shooting 32% on threes. He's only shooting 34% from the field. He is at over 90% on free throws, but he still has that go-off potential. He has that ability that in a specific game he could go for 30 points, and that's the danger here. But overall in the season, hasn't been very efficient. 6'3" Cam Carter is another starting guard for them. and he's been really good. He's in the running for Big 12 Most Improved Player. He went from 6 points per game last year. Now he's leading the team at 15.8, also 4.7 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 1.7 steals. He's shooting 41.5% from the floor, 32.4% from three on very high volume as well, and over 83% on free throws. You'll see some day-to-day aims. He is a prized recruit freshman for them, plenty amount. Kind of throughout some of the guard positions. He's a good athlete, but he's shooting under 30% from the field right now, which honestly against Kansas makes him a prime candidate to hit like 2 or 3 threes. Let's be honest. Arthur Kaluma was another nice addition for them. He came in the portal for Kansas State as kind of a 3-4 man wing, 6'7" forward, 14.4 points per game, 7.1 rebounds per game, 1.9 assists on 44, 37, 76 shooting splits. Then at the, big men spot, 6'9", 220-pound forward is David Ngesson. Plays mostly the 4. He'll play some 5 also. And he's more of a low-volume shooter, not going to do a ton on the offensive end, but more of a rebounder and defender, and will clean things up on the offensive side. And then beyond him at the 5, when he's not playing the 5, you'll see a lot of 6'11", 265-pound senior Will McNair. He's over 7.5 points per game. Solid rebounder, also over 60%. Also not somebody who they're going to like run the offense through, but every so often we'll get a bucket for him or clean something up. And then 6'10", 235-pound Jarrell Colbert, who's kind of just another body they'll throw in there at the 5. Other players like 6'4" freshman Dorian Finister, 6'3" freshman RJ Jones, 6'7" freshman Taj Manning. All of them could snag minutes and I think have bright futures. This seems to be a pretty good recruiting class for the long term for Kansas State, but in terms of right now, they're not really fully established for what they're going to be. All right, let's continue on with our matchups of the game and then our Hawks to Soar on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to be for sure that you can find quality professionals that are for the right role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. Has all the right tools to help you find the professionals for your team faster and for free. They're not just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that, making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can check out LinkedIn Jobs. They help small businesses that wear many hats and might not have as much time to go through the hiring process or find the right people. LinkedIn's going to make that a lot easier. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On to our matchups of the game. We'll get to our player matchup and then Hawks to Soar for KU K-State preview. Thank you for tuning in to each and every episode. Don't forget, you can check out the recap of the KU Houston game from last week. We'll have plenty more content coming at you this week with Locked On Jayhawks. All right, first matchup here. KU's interior offense against Kansas State's interior defense. In games where opposing teams shoot 50% or better from 2-point range against the Wildcats, Kansas State is just 4-6. In games where they hold teams to under 50% on twos, K-State is 10-2. The 2 losses were Nebraska, who Nebraska shot like a bunch of threes and had a bunch of offensive rebounds in the game, and then Houston, who's just one of the best teams in the country. So if you shoot basically 50% or higher, you're going to be in a good spot against the Kansas State team. On paper, this is kind of strength on strength. Like that's something Kansas does normally in their sleep. Kansas State, though, has done a much better job at preventing teams from doing that. But then again, we just saw Kansas be able to dice up even Houston. So, what's Kansas State to that, right? But you never know. On the road, weird things happen, all that sort of stuff. But Kansas in Big 12 only games is shooting 60.2% on twos. That is second best in league play. K-State's defense holds teams to 46% on twos. That is third best in the conference. So strength on strength there. And then when you narrow your focus to really inside, like at the rim, for instance, Kansas gets 40.4 paint points per game. On the other side, meanwhile, K-State's getting 27.8, but this is more about KU offense versus K-State defense. Jayhawks right now take 37% of their shots. So the amount of field goal attempts, over a third of them, about 2 in every 5 are shots at the rim. National average is about 30%. They're at 37%. So they're taking way more shots at the rim than other teams. Makes sense. They're good at it. They're shooting 71% at the rim, up to about 73% in conference-only games. K-State has given up a slightly above national average for shots at the rim. I just mentioned national average shots at the rim is about 30%. Teams shoot them about 31% of the time against this K-State defense. So it's about average. But teams have only shot 57.6% at the rim against the Wildcats in Big 12 play. It is up, but it's still only 59.4%. So something's got to give there. But if KU executes, you should feel good about it, unless our third thing for our third matchup ends up happening that maybe they can overcome it. But we'll get to that in a second. Matchup number 2, try to speed up the tempo. K-State isn't an overly slow team, but they're not a fast team either. On KenPom, they rank 233rd in tempo rating, so they're on the slower half of things. And Kansas gets a little bit more in transition than K-State does. KU's averaging 12.8 fast break points per game. In Big 12 games, K-State's only at 8.5. That is the difference between the 87th percentile and the 35th percentile, so big distance between the two, according to CBB analytics, respectively, in the nation. So if you're Kansas, get more transition opportunities. Make this more of a fast-paced game, and I think that does favor you in this one, especially because then it lets you kind of beat their defense down the floor. Number 3 is don't let Cam Carter or Tyler Perry get hot. It really is these two guys. Now, obviously, as I was joking around, like there'll probably be some random guy for K-State who it's like, oh, he's never hit more than 1 3 in a game before, and he hits 3 threes in the game, right? That just happens against KU. But for the most part, it is these two guys who are going to bear the load of the three-point attempts. Collectively, Carter and Perry are shooting about 32% from 3. So, that shouldn't kill you necessarily as a defense if they do that for the game. But this is what's crazy. As a team, Kansas State has 531 three-point attempts this season. Of the 531 three-point attempts, 320 of them come from just those two guys, meaning that just Tyler Perry and Cam Carter are averaging 14.5 three-point attempts per game from just two guys. Kansas as a team averages 17.5 three-point attempts per game. So Kansas as a team is only averaging 3 more threes per game attempted than what just those two starting guards are doing for Kansas State. For what it's worth, Kansas State gets most of their threes above the break, about 33% of their shots, so about 1 in every 3 shot that goes up for them all around the court are above the break threes. So that's interesting. Only 9% of their shots are coming in terms of corner threes, which for what it's worth, KU has given up more above the break threes than corner threes, and teams have shot 36% from 3 above the break in conference play. So maybe that's not ideal. But anyway, this would create a bit of a math issue in scoring if either or if both of those guys get hot, because it's going to be tough for Kansas to keep up with the volume of threes with Kansas State, to where if they're shooting, 33s, if those two guys have as many three-point attempts as Kansas does as a team, and they're hitting them at a high rate, it's going to be tough to play that math game and keep up with what they're doing. And here we are again in the ultimate discourse of what is three-point defense and what can you do and what can't you do and what's luck and what's not luck. And I don't want to get into that again. But if you force them into tough shots over and over and deny the ball enough, you should be okay. The way they win this game is 1 or 2 of them go off and get super hot from 3. Even then, you could still find a way to win the game if you do other things. Like I remember a game in Manhattan a few years ago, right? It was Nigel Pack with Marquise Noel just went absolutely off from 3, right? And then KU had that big comeback down 15 or whatever it was at half. KU goes on to win the game. KU goes on to win the national title. Rest is history. But still, that is how one of the ways that the Kansas State kind of wins the game. So do your best to not lose any shooters and let them get into a rhythm. Our player matchup is Arthur Kaluma versus Kevin McCullar on the wing. There's a world where if Kevin McCullar stays in the NBA draft this past offseason, that Arthur Kaluma ends up in a KU uniform. Who knows? Maybe he still would have ended up going to K-State. Maybe the situation was right. You would think, though, if Kevin McCullar, maybe goes off to the NBA, Kansas is playing with some big boy NIL money and a real opportunity to be out there, that maybe they do make a stronger push for him. I have no idea. Maybe it happens. Maybe it doesn't. But either way, I do think that would be kind of interesting. Both guys are pro prospects. If you looked at some draft boards this past offseason, Arthur Kaluma was actually kind of higher on a few than maybe Kevin was, or they were at least like in the same range. Now it's not even close. Like Kevin McCullar is seen as being like a possible top 20 pick or a lottery pick in this next year's NBA draft. But both are key to their teams. Kaluma actually ranks as K-State's top defender by defensive BPR on Evan Miyakawa's site. Kevin's the same for Kansas, so possibly the two best defenders could be going at each other. They can both play the 3. They can both play the 4. They both rebound it well. They both can shoot it at times. they do a lot to make an impact. So it should be a really fun matchup between a couple of good basketball players, between Kaluma and McCullar. Let's continue on with our Hawks to Soar, KU players we think can have big games on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch. Grab the recliner if you can. Grabbing your favorite football snacks, all about the buffalo chicken dip or the wings, anything in that kind of range, and placing some super bets, which I do and can do with FanDuel. You can bet on which team's going to win the Super Bowl. You can get in on the spread. You can do an alt spread. You can do the over-under for points. You can get in on somebody to score a touchdown or over-under yards. Build your own same-game parlay. They'll have their own parlays that you can build off of if you can't come up with something yourself. And new customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Finishing up with our Hawks to Soar, KU players we think can have big games based on the matchup here against Kansas State. Thanks for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks. First up, we're going to go Dajuan Harris. Tyler Perry is somebody who can get hot in a hurry and can really go off in any specific game. He can also shoot yourself out of games in certain ways. He's not been a very good defender, which is interesting because when he was at North Texas a year before, his synergy numbers ranked really good on the defensive end of the court. North Texas had a really good defense. I don't know. Maybe that was more of the scheme. Maybe it was he's just being asked to do even more and play a bit faster tempo. And so it's harder to conserve energy on the defense. Hasn't ranked well in defensive BPR on the defensive end. So I find that very interesting. But I do think Dajuan is going to have an opportunity to try to control this game. The big ones, though, Johnny Furphy and Kevin McCullar. So we mentioned this in the Houston game, and it ended up coming to fruition. Corner threes were going to be there. Can you knock them down? Kansas knocked them down at a very high rate against Houston on those corner threes. Well, guess what? That's the case again when you're playing Kansas State. Kansas State ranks in the 8th percentile during conference-only play for amount of corner threes per field goal attempt given up. Layman's term, they're giving up a lot of corner threes. They're giving up a high rate of corner threes. And in those shots, teams are knocking them down at a 38% clip from three. Kevin McCullar leads Kansas with 1.9 corner three-point attempts per game. He's shooting them at 38%. Johnny Furphy is second on KU with 1.8 corner three-point attempts per game. He is shooting them at 47%. So I'm riding with Furphy. I'm riding with McCullar, the veteran going on the road, right? With Furphy, we've still seen him play well in these road games. He had the 15 in the first half in Stillwater. He had that nice start in West Virginia. I know there was the rebound late, but I thought outside of that, he did some good things. So those two players, I think, could have an opportunity to knock down some corner threes. And I'll be interested to see the Hunter Dickinson part of this because he is somebody that college basketball world has almost known as a villain. And so a villain playing on the road in that environment, it should be good for him. He should thrive in that. Then again, I think of him being a villain in the Illinois series and he never won there. And we saw when you go back to the Illinois exhibition game, and then again, it's an exhibition game. So should I really, even think about it much, but still, I think he had 20 points in the game, but he took 20 shots or something like that. And it wasn't an overly, impressive performance. So I don't know what to think of that, but I do tend to lean on the side of, I think Hunter is going to thrive in that environment at K-State and want to shut up those fans. So I'm going to say that Hunter, Johnny, and Kevin are my official picks for Hawks to Soar. I know that's a lot. That's basically 60% of the starting five, but anyway, whatever. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. Like and subscribe to the show. See you next time with LOJ.